Thank you for coming to Roundabout Books. My name is Cassie, and as the owner of Roundabout, it's an honor to welcome you to the bookshop to share the discussion of ideas and knowledge within our community. Before we move forward, please join me in acknowledging the land we're using today. We acknowledge that our bookstore resides on the ancestral, unceded lands of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. In our neighboring area are also the unceded lands of the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians and tribes of the Grand Rome. We encourage everyone to learn more about the land we occupy and the story of its peoples. We return together tonight for our fourth conversation about the circumstances surrounding poverty in Central Oregon. Tonight, the entirety of our focus is devoted to gaining a better understanding and shattering previously held assumptions about living houseless in Central Oregon. Please remember that our panelists are all volunteering their time tonight. Your questions are very welcome, but our speakers deserve our attention and respect in all interactions. Our format is set up so that the first half of the time, each panelist will have time to talk and introduce themselves and their work. This will be followed with a guided conversation led by our facilitator, and then the second half of the time will be open for questions and discussion. Finally, I'd like to introduce my partner on this project, Donna Berklow, the Family Kitchen Program Director. She's been involved with Family Kitchen for about 15 years, including 10 as a staff member. She works with 400 incredible volunteers to assemble 14,000 hot, nutritious meals for the Central Oregon community each month. Donna organized our speakers tonight, and I'm turning it over to her to introduce them. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you for this lovely spot to be in, and the fact that it just feels like we really kind of can be having a conversation, so we're ready for that. We're looking forward to a conversation where we can offer up realities of what we see, statistically and anecdotally, about the humans we interact with regularly. We are looking forward to knowing what questions you have, so get ready, start forming them if you haven't already. And we want to hear any ideas that you have for healthy progress. As service providers in this field, we are often at the table for community presentation only when a community meeting has been called over a contested decision and divisiveness is present from the start. We were just talking about that in our little huddle. Please know that these panelists and facilitators are here on their own time, sometimes representing their respective organizations and sometimes relaying their own personal experience and observations, yet always looking to promote further understanding and advocate for solutions that might possibly eliminate the suffering we see. Combative, divisive speech and action are not the basis for community conversation and will not be tolerated. We will simply end the event. A helpful guide many of us use at the start of meetings is one we'd like to follow this evening. It's the Tools of Civility. You see it around and about. So it's good reminders for how we might want to work together tonight. To a person, we're all looking forward to being in conversation together. I do know that there are other service providers that are out in the audience as well, and I think it would be great if after we're done, if you want to seek out other folks too, in addition to our panelists, to talk to them, please do that. If you are a service provider in the room, please raise your hand. Yeah, a couple other folks here. So yeah, be sure to seek out any of us afterwards. We'd love to talk some more. And now I am very privileged and proud to introduce Eliza Wilson, who is our facilitator this evening. Eliza is the Director of Runaway and Homeless Youth Services for JBAR-J. She's the chair of our local Continuum of Care, which is the Homeless Leadership Coalition, and has worked locally in homeless services for 15 years. Much of Eliza's career has been an advocate and frontline staff, providing care to youth and families living unsheltered in our community. Having experienced homelessness most of her childhood, Eliza brings her lived experience to her work every day. She believes that addressing this crisis takes a community-wide approach of compassion, humanity, and kindness. Now I hand it over to Eliza.
Thank you, Donna. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. I have the mic that has to go straight up to my mouth. So if you have any issues, just let me know. And I feel really privileged to be in this space with you guys tonight. Thank you so much for coming. And as Donna said, start thinking about some questions you have for us tonight, because we really do want to spend a lot of the time having a safe space with you all to give you the opportunity to ask us real questions. But first I want to introduce the amazing women next to me. Johanna. For the last several years, Johanna has served as a community outreach advocate with Thrive Central Oregon. Walking alongside individuals and families, Johanna has helped folks navigate the ever-changing resources in our community and help connect them to myriads, what's a nice word? of basic needs and housing. Johanna is also the founder and executive director of Champion Animal Medical Project. Yeah. Sorry, CAMP. A nonprofit that provides free veterinary care and supplies for pet owners experiencing homelessness. You guys have heard of her? Yeah, she does amazing work. Colleen has lived and worked in Central Oregon, Deschutes County for the last 12 years, 10 of which have been dedicated to working within homeless services. Currently, Colleen is a supervisor for Houseless Outreach Services Team and Harm Reduction Program at Deschutes County Behavioral Health, working directly with individuals that are literally homeless, that have serious, persistent mental illness or substance abuse disorder. As an advocate, Colleen believes that everyone in our community deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, despite their living conditions. Giving voice to underserved and vulnerable populations is a passion of hers. And then our lovely Stacy. Stacy Whitty is the founder and executive director of REACH. REACH provides mobile outreach and case management to our most vulnerable community members. REACH also provides housing retention for FUs, operates safe parking, and a cleanup project around Central District. Meeting people where they are is critical in building relationships. Providing the tools people need to build greater self-sufficiency and independence is a cornerstone to their program. Thank you, ladies. So I'm just gonna ask a couple questions of them, and then we'll get into the questions you guys maybe have of us. What would you, and any of you, if you want to answer, what are some common misconceptions that you hear, whether from audience members sometimes, or when you're in the community, just common misconceptions that you hear about people who are facing homelessness in our area?
I'll be happy to dive in.
Yeah, it's already on.
Oh, thank you. Okay. There are a lot of misconceptions. I think the first one is...
Did it?
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that the misconceptions, there are so many of those misconceptions. Not politically correct to sometimes mention that I think we view our unhoused community members as being lazy, not wanting to work, filthy, dirty, going to the bathroom everywhere. Everyone has substance use disorders and or mental illness, and this is furthest from the truth. The population of our unhoused community members is diverse as our community that's housed. Houselessness should not define the person. It is amazing to me how many articulate, bright people that we have experiencing houselessness, and everyone has come into this on a different path and are going to leave houselessness on a different path as well. And so I think that's a huge misconception. And then it's also, we see some community members that maybe not be taking care of their trust, and that we're judging an entire population on that. So it's about being mindful and respectful of those individuals.
So at Thrive's in Oregon, I don't know if many people are familiar with Thrive, but we work with individuals and families and connect them to resources throughout the community. We receive, and I'm sure like Colleen and Stacy here, the amount of calls that we receive daily are 5 to 25, if not more. And the calls range from I need a gas card to more descriptive requests where I'm a single mom. I'm living in my car with my children. I have a dog, I have a cat. I can't get to work. I don't have childcare. And I think we see the folks who are on the tent, or living in the tent. We see the folks who have the RV on the side of the road. And that's our quick snapshot of that's homelessness. That's what it looks like. But you are buying food from someone who is experiencing homelessness. You are getting medical care from someone who is experiencing homelessness. You're getting your gas pumped from someone who is experiencing homelessness. So we've tried to wrap it up into this dirty bow of what it looks like, and they're just one of us. So I think that's the misconception, I think, in my work that I have seen, is that it's so quick to look at someone and say that's what it is, but it's really any one of us in one major crisis.
I think that I wanted to add, I think that's a really good point in the way you said that, I wanna add that, like, if you have children that are in school, your children are going to school with children who are experiencing homelessness. I think that's something that we forget, that there's not one way that it looks. So that was a great point, thanks.
I just want to add one thing that I think we hear so often right now as a misconception is it's in a line with, if you build it, they will come. The more resources that we bring, the more people are going to come to Central Oregon. And in fact, that when we are engaging with the people that we see every day, I think it's well above the 80% that respond to the annual point in time count that live and work in our community. They've lost their homes, they've had a medical condition, we just are still coming out of COVID and people are losing their homes left and right and are forced into unsheltered homelessness in Central Oregon without the resources that we have. It's very rare, even though maybe in the mainstream media we hear people are coming here because drugs are legal and we're building shelters. It's not necessarily the case. There are few and far between that is the reality, but the people that we serve and work with every day are our community members. They're our neighbors that have lived and worked and made Central Oregon their home.
What are some of the common barriers that you see people that you work with or have worked with experience that makes it harder for them to come out of or become housed?
You go. So let's see. I think what kind of came to my mind is getting a driver's license. That's something for me that I don't have to think about. I have the ability to access the funds, maybe study for the test. Don't have a criminal history, so I can just go get a driver's license. A lot of folks, that's not an easy task. So when you're looking at barriers can be as little as just obtaining the appropriate documentation to getting housed. It could look like criminal history, and if someone has a record, then the odds of them getting housed in market rate rentals is extremely tough. So that pretty much, depending on what the criminal history is, that could present as a really significant barrier to getting housed. That could look like an eviction. So, right, Colleen just mentioned that, a lot of people are being evicted after COVID. The COVID money's gone. They didn't pay rent. They have a bad rental reference. And this is something at Thrive we see all the time is they have an eviction on their record, and the reality that individual family is getting housed within the next year is very unlikely. So those are the folks that are forced into homelessness. Maybe they lost their job, maybe there was a major medical, maybe there's a loss of a family member. There's just so many myriad of different things that can happen that prevent someone to re-accessing housing. So I think that's often looked past when someone says, well, why can't you just get a job, or why can't you just go get into housing? Well, we have very limited housing options. We have very limited shelter options. And it's not that easy just to go get a job if you don't have the appropriate documentation. So I think all of those things, in the dog world, we call it trigger stacking. And that's kind of like the same thing. The more you stack these things up, the more it decreases someone's ability to access their own basic needs, like housing.
of the things I often get asked in talking is, you gotta pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The challenge is, if you don't have boots, let alone shoes on your feet, this can be a really big ask of someone. We have many people that get jobs and employment, and maybe the shower truck only comes on a certain day and you can't shower to get to work. Your phone may not be charged, so you don't have a clock, so you may get to work late. So the things that all of us take for granted often that are just our everyday life, going to the bathroom, getting in our vehicle and going to work, are barriers. And the barriers start there, and if we can't address those kind of low-hanging fruit barriers, then it makes it even more challenging. One thing I do like when I talk to groups is also to visualize our entire community. If you remove the walls and the roof of your home and all the people in your area, you are going to see some amazing, wonderful people. You're going to see people with a lot of challenges. You're going to see addiction, substance use disorders, DV, domestic violence. So the difference is when someone's experiencing houselessness, everything they do, they say, is exposed. And so it's a good moment to stop and take a breath and really think about that, because I can tell you there are times if you open my house is a disaster sometimes, right? And no one can see that. I can hide that very nicely in my little home. And that is a huge barrier. And the stereotypes. We have many people that get jobs, and just being able to get there is that huge obstacle.
I mean, I think you guys hit on a lot of barriers. One of the things I want to just touch on is I often hear sometimes, well, that person has a substance use disorder, why can't they just go to detox? And if you don't know, in Central Oregon, we have 8 residential beds for detox. 8. So you have somebody that goes into treatment, is ready. They may not have, their health insurance might not be active, so they've got to get on their health insurance. And they're saying right to you right then and there, I'm ready to make a change. They're like, okay, great. Let's make sure we've got this in place. Then we gotta wait about 2 to 3 weeks until you get that bed. Do you think you'll still be ready then? And so the barriers on a systemic level for the resources that we have, although we do have resources, they are extremely limited. And so for myself and my team, it's continuing to show up and to support those folks and kind of guide them along that way to say there is hope. It's just not this instant gratification that our society, I think, expects day in and day out.
Thank you guys so much for just highlighting those things for us. I think when people are, born into having these protective factors and not having experienced different things that others experience, like poverty, houselessness, any of those things, I think it can be really hard to understand what's different between, ourselves and other people, and how it's not a choice, that people haven't chosen to experience those things that are different than our experiences. I think you guys kind of answered this already, but if there's any more that you'd like to add, I think some things that I've heard, mostly in the media, I really shouldn't read the comment section, ever. But how, I think there is also a common misconception that maybe that providers aren't doing enough, or that the, either it's like the person who's experiencing houselessness fault for not getting out of it, or that there's not enough, we know there's not enough resources to get out of it, and we're living in an area that has a housing crisis, just kind of like on all spectrums of housing. But how do local providers work with people to address barriers, or even like what are more services that you think we need that we are lacking, or something around services, anything?
Excuse me. There are amazing service providers in this area. I came from the Washington State area, and that area is much more populated, so there's more services. I think we have to remember that Bend is growing, and our infrastructures in every arena are catching up with the needs of the city and the needs of our houseless population and our housed population. We see it on all realms. And so I think we have so many wonderful services, but we have gaps in services. Colleen mentioned 8 beds. So right now, if someone needs to detox, they go to the hospital. Maybe you have to utilize first responders to get there. They do their medical detox. They're then discharged back out onto the street with the same complexities and triggers and challenges. And also with the same friends and the same group. So we see this cycle, and I think we have to address that. Some cities will have sobering centers. Someone told me one of the police or fire told me that 30 or 35 years ago, Bend actually had a sobering center, and we don't currently have one. More detox beds are needed. I think when we are approaching folks, what we're doing is we're not telling you what you need to do. We're asking questions. We want to know what's working well, what are the challenges, and what tools can we help to give you to be more self-sufficient and independent. That may be a pair of shoes for someone. For someone else, it might be help getting their prescriptions. I see a lot of our older adults in the community that are taking their heart meds every 4 days instead of every day because they can't afford or get to go pick up the prescriptions. So I think service providers are trying to provide those services. It's a very fine line between empowering and enabling. And you walk that fine line every day as a service provider, and we do the best we can. I think validating people, listening to people, and kind of knowing we can't solve this all overnight, but really wanting to know, if you woke up tomorrow, where would you want to wake up, and what would your day look like, and what would your housing look like? All of you in this room had choices, albeit financially driven. Do you want to live in an apartment or a condo or a house? And we need to make sure we have those same options open for our unhoused neighbors.
What do I want to say on this? So I think one of the beauties that we have in Central Oregon is the relationship between service providers. We work really closely and collaborate. I mean, I probably talk to these ladies daily, if not weekly, in regards to making sure that the people we're working with have connection to what their this person-centered approach, what they need. When we talk about solutions, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Every person is individual and unique. And so I think when we talk about long-term solutions or what our gaps are in resources, we need to think of everything from potential managed camp to permanent supportive housing and everything in between, because every person we can't put them into this cookie cutter mold of what our community and society thinks or wants to happen for an individual. And so I think that the strengths we have in Central Oregon is we work really well together. We don't have the resources strong enough to meet the needs, the population of folks that are unhoused alongside the resources that are coming to town. Like, we have some amazing things that are coming to our community, but they are moving at a steady pace together. And so it may look like we're not doing something as a community, we're not addressing the issue. It's just that the overall issue is growing at the same pace as the resources. And so I think I try to say to folks is like, we have to lean on one another for some of the opposition that is in our community and know that we are making an impact one person at a time. And that might be that we are reconnecting somebody with a family member. We're really kind of understanding what is this person, what are their barriers, and how can we remove those so that they can be successful in whatever they want to do right then and there. I think I went off on a tangent.
No,
Okay.
it's beautiful.
I don't know if I have much to add. I would just really emphasize choice. I think about when someone tells me what to do, how much I hate that. I want to make my own choice. I want to go where I want to go, see who I want to see, and those are obviously a lot lighter things. But when we're working with folks, to again reiterate what both Stacy and Colleen said, we're asking where do you see yourself? What do you need? How do you get this service? How do you get this resource? And we're constantly filing information in our taking notes, in our, talking to one another, trying to remember where this person's at, where that person's at, who this person is with, where are they on the chronicity of homelessness, like how long have they been living outdoors, how many barriers do they have, so that we're just taking so many mental notes all the time. And it still comes back to choice. We can't force anyone to do anything that they don't want to do, let alone they're ready to do. And that takes time. Like that takes relationship building. That takes us building trust. We're coming. Yeah, it's our community, but like we're really coming on to their home. It's their home. They've built a life for themselves. Whether it's on the side of the road, whether it's out in dirt, like this is where they feel safe. And we're walking into their home. And now we're telling them what they need. And I think in saying that out loud, like, I hope that makes you guys feel like, ugh. Because like that feels ugh to me. That would feel like if someone came into my home and said, why do you live like this? Why do you have that there? Why don't you do this? Like, that's pretty, like, that's humiliating, that's pretty, like, that's a lot of things. So I hope, like, I know, like, this is, like, the heart, like, yeah, this is the real stuff right there, like, it doesn't feel good. And us reminding them of that doesn't make them feel good. And it doesn't get the service providers anywhere. It doesn't get us anywhere. So, that's what I guess I have to add. I guess I had something to add.
I do want to add two things to that, because I think one of the other challenges as a service provider is how do we balance the needs of our unhoused community and the reality is that we also have to respect our housed community members. People have businesses, people have homes, and it is very frightening and scary and actually not okay when someone's sitting in front of your business or going to the bathroom in front of your business. Those are the needs of the people, and that as a community, we need to address that. So how do we provide those needed services for people in also at the same time respecting our housed community and without making our unhoused community feel like they're in some kind of, camp or concentration camp where they don't have voices and they don't have a say in things. As we're talking about this, it sounds a little disjointed in terms of how we collaborate. It's important to know that there is a system that's in place, called coordinated entry. And I don't need to go into all the details, but essentially we do assessments with folks. And if they're willing to do it and self-report on their situation, and then if they want to participate with that, they're all entered into a system so that we can go ahead and make sure that service providers are reaching out, that they're on lists for housing, our turnkey motel programs that you've heard the city purchased. So there is a coordinated entry process to that. It's not just, I like you best, or you have blue shoes on, so there is a coordination effort.
And because our region and our area, and specifically Bend, where most of the programs are, and coming in Redmond, because we only have so many beds in that system, we have to prioritize people who are at most at need. We can't serve everybody. So I think that is important to know. We have to look at people and their lives and the vulnerabilities that they have, and we have to decide, which also feels very icky, who's most at need of dying, like who is most likely to die on the street. And so that is what we have to do in that system, because that's the reality of the issue of houselessness in Central Oregon, because our extreme weather, and there's so many things to that. I think, Stacey, your comment about like people in front of businesses and things like that, and what I was thinking about when Johanna was talking too is just like, you don't have to understand, but I truly believe, I should say it that way, I truly believe people do the best with what they have, with the knowledge that they have and the education that they have and the resources that they have. And so if people don't have resources of a restroom, what other thing can they do? If people don't have somewhere to throw away their garbage, there's a lot of things that lead to the visible issues that we hear about most often from the public. And a lot of times that is not having access to things that people need, basic needs that we all have.
Can I add one thing? I did tell Donna I needed an hour to myself today, but she did not respect that, so. The one other thing I did want to say, and now I just really lost my train of thought after I did that. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna come back to it, because I just completely lost my train of thought.
It'll come back.
I'll
Step
step
in,
back.
and then you can
Thank you.
remember. I think I wanted to kind of go back to like the stereotypes, because something that you mentioned, we hear a lot like they want to be homeless, like they choose this lifestyle, they choose to live outdoors, and I could probably 100% say that 99.99999 people that we interact with day to day say, how can I get into shelter? How can I get housed? Where am I at on this wait list? I don't want to be out here. And as service providers, kind of going back to us working together, is we have really gut-wrenching conversations with people every day saying, you are 255 on this wait list, and you are 35 on this shelter wait list, and you're not on any wait list, so like let's start doing it now. And we don't have, a lot of the times there's little things that we can do, and we can meet that quick basic need, but we don't have the answer when people are metaphorically on our doorstep saying, I need help, and we have nothing to say. And I think that goes back to us, the service providers are trying really hard and working with so many individuals and families and offering up everything that we can, and it's still not enough. And that is incredibly hard on the service providers that they themselves don't have enough resources, and are becoming very crafty and working together and saying, I don't have this, but I know that this person does, so I'm gonna call them right now, and I'm gonna go pick it up, and then I'll have to go here, and now I have to go here, and then I'll meet you in 5 hours. So be here, like don't leave, because I can get you socks. And they're constantly to their point, like the relationships with service providers and the limited resources and not enough, I hope that kind of just paints a picture of, we are trying, and if there is a crisis, if you're feeling it, that's not wrong, and know that the service providers and the people out there supporting the people also feel that.
Okay, I remember, so I gotta say it fast. 18 years ago when I started working with our unhoused populations, we used to have this little bell in our office, and every time someone got housing, we would ring the bell and everyone would celebrate, and we kind of said, our job is done, we're great. And then what we saw is people were not able to retain their housing. They had been on the street for so long, where the complexities, or how do you write a check or pay a bill, or being out in a camp. So what we have grown to know over the years is that in order to build housing retention, we have to continue that case management, that relationship, so that we can meet with people, we can address the challenges. And sometimes the challenge is someone's been out in the dirt for 8 years, and they've talked to each other with no one around, so their voices are so loud. And now we have to have the conversation like you have neighbors, and you have a dog, so you've got to clean up, you can't just leave it out in the dirt. And so those are the conversations. The challenge is not that we don't know we need that, but it's still the capacity, right? Having enough staff to continue those relationships. And I'm glad that we now have a better understanding, so that's so important to remember.
That is such a good point. I think also it can be people form community where they are. And so to think that people who are living unsheltered in our community are not having community is not true. They have tight-knit communities, they take care of each other, take care of each other's children, love each other. They get in fights, because we all do with our community, right? We don't always get along with our neighbors. But so sometimes when people get into housing, it can be very isolating when that does happen. And sometimes they want to bring all their friends, you know, so why wouldn't you? So yeah, there's a lot of complexities to this, and like you all have said, there's not really like one size fits all, one story for each individual person has such different needs. So we talked longer than we thought we would. But we do want this to be like a safe place for questions and open it up to you guys to have dialogue and give you a chance to talk to us. So I think we're going to do that now.
So questions, it's that time.
How many shelters are there? And what are they like?
And how long have they been there?
Well, how long?
How long that's something to say.
Do you guys know how many? I can count on my fingers.
Yeah, so we have a high barrier shelter. Bethlehem Inn is our high barrier shelter, and I'm gonna suggest that maybe it's been in town the longest. I'll let Colleen. There's also Shepherd's House that has a men's house and a women's house. The Lighthouse is operated by Shepherd's House, and that's a low barrier shelter. Low barrier shelters mean that there are guidelines there, but you can come in under the influence of drugs and alcohol. It's behavior based. We want to make sure people aren't out there exposed to elements. And then we also have the 2 motels that were purchased by the city. One is operated by Neighbor Impact. We do the case management there, and the other one is operated by Shepherd's House. I'd like to add if I missed.
And those are all in Bend. Some of those shelters, like the women's shelter and men's shelter for Shepherd's House, they're different types of shelter. They're like long-term, like religious-based, so you have to, like a program that you have to like, you know, there's certain guidelines. And then Grandma's House in Central Oregon and the Loft are both youth shelters. The Loft has been here since '02 and serves about 12, but I think we're expanding to 18 beds for youth experiencing homelessness for up to 2 years. We can shelter them there. And then Grandma's House has been in Central Oregon for over 30 years. And Grandma's House is a shelter for pregnant and parenting teens. I lived at both of those shelters. And Grandma's House, they can also be there for 2 years or longer sometimes. And we can serve now 10 families there. So 11 technically, families, so youth and their children.
And I'll just add, Dawn's house has
Thank
quite
you.
a number of shelters. But if we took all the numbers, I think, I'm just gonna throw something rough out there, but I think that might be a total of maybe 500 beds if we total all of that. And there was a graphic that just came out recently. Of those, probably close to 300 were only introduced in the last year and a half.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, because at the point in time count, you can look to see how many people were sheltered, and we were pretty much like every bed was a person was in it. So,
Other questions?
You talk about the resources in terms of shelters and beds and volunteers and staff, but what about the, among the 4 of you, what about collectively the funding resources, the funding streams? What are the most prominent funding streams directly to any of your services, like federal money? Is it state money? Is it charitable money?
I can speak for myself, and as for Deschutes County Health Services, we received money from Measure 110 that added 7 staff to my team. We also received ARPA funding, which is the American Rescue Relief funding through COVID. We also received grants through the state, which is from, again, federal grants that are passed down through the state through SAMHSA, which is Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. And then we have general funds from the county, and that all goes towards staff. And through those budget line items, we do have budget line items that go for supplies so that we can purchase tents and safe using supplies, naloxone to give out to folks that are actively using. And so most of it for my program is coming from the state or federal government.
Is it adequate?
Never know.
Not to meet the need that we have. I can speak for youth funding in the region. So JRJ is there's a lot of, community partners that we have that do serve youth. Mostly the older end of the spectrum, or even like, if you're going out into the camps, like you'll see parents with their children, or sometimes you'll come across like some older youth in there. But we specifically to like developmentally, like the shelters and stuff, we just serve youth. And our programs are designed a little bit differently with how many like ratios we have for staff and things like that. So we provide a like 24-hour support, and so we have to piece, like Colleen just kind of mentioned, we have to piece together funding. And all of our funding streams we have to apply for on a grant cycle. So whether it's like yearly and we may not get them, or every 2 years, every 3 years, our federal grants, which are like long-term funding for youth experiencing homelessness. We have all of the federal grants that a program can get to support youth. So to support young youth and like trying to get youth back into, work with their families and family mediation and working with the schools, and then, emergency shelter, and then the grandma's house. So we have all of those different funding streams, but the amount they give for those grants have not gone up in 20 years. So they have not increased funding for those grants in 20 years. So we now that the state is kind of providing more money, so we apply for that every year. So we did recently get awarded for a 2-year grant from the state of Oregon for operational funding to supplement the federal funding. So like Colleen, we have to kind of just apply for different types of grants to try to piece together funding to have this adequate staffing. But like she said, you need more because the numbers are rising because we're not meeting the need in our area yet. So that's why it seems like, okay, well, are we getting anywhere? Well, we don't have enough resources for people experiencing homelessness, so you're not seeing the number go down because we're just not able to meet the need.
Just to add to that too, Colleen was the only person doing her job 2 years ago? Yeah. 2 years ago.
We grew 800% in the last year.
For REACH, we're a relatively small nonprofit, and we run on a shoestring, so we do things mobile, so we don't have overhead. We actually use the farmhouse on our ranch for all of our inventory, and but we get funding through numerous contracts and grants. So the City of Bend, REACH has a contract with the City of Bend, so that first responders can reach out to us and dispatch us out when say there's a fire on one of the pieces of property. We need to get out there and talk to them once the fire's out. We can make sure they have safe equipment so that they're not burning a campfire in an area that's not safe. But Central Oregon Health Council, United Way, Oregon Community Foundation, we do receive city, state, and federal grants through other larger entities like Neighbor Impact that will filter to us and have contracts with Fuse, which provides permanent supportive housing. And then we do have support from our faith-based groups in town, and we currently are running a safe parking program at 3 locations thanks to 3 of the churches. It right now is home to 10 households, and we've been working on that for 3.5 years, and unfortunately only have 3 locations, mostly due, I think, to optics. So we're really trying to educate people on what that looks like. And each of our 3 spaces have anywhere from 2 to 4 households. So this is not a large safe parking.
I'm not the executive director of Thrive, so I don't. but I am the executive director of Companion Animal Medical Project, and like Eliza mentioned, we provide free vet care for pet owners who are experiencing homelessness. So we go out to different houseless communities throughout Central Oregon and provide on-site vet care, help arrange free spay and neuter, pass out pet food and supplies, with the goal that we can help keep the pets healthy. And then ideally the pet parents could have a little more to continue to access their own basic needs. And for us, we are very small, so we get a lot of support from the community. We have a great animal welfare community here in Central Oregon. And so we teeter that line between human service and animal services. So I'm starting to get some more grants, so that are generally just like foundation grants.
Other questions?
We talked about having maybe 500 beds, is that kind of a number? But what is the need? I mean,
That's a great question.
I haven't quite figured that one out.
Yeah.
A lot more.
So every year, the federal government asks communities all around the country to do a count. The point in time count, you guys have probably heard, because you're here, so you're interested already, so you probably already heard that. So in Central Oregon, this last January, we counted over 1,600 people experiencing homelessness. That is just a snapshot, because it's in the middle of winter. Some folks are harder to count. There's a lot of reasons, because it's just us counting, because not everybody wants to answer a survey about their experience when it's traumatic that they're experiencing, houselessness. So I don't like to guess, but we know for sure in January.
But if you've got, say, you were saying, you might be telling somebody they're 250 on the list or something like that. So I mean, and so it's kind of like there's shelters, but then which is really, I would think, a little different than housing. I mean, it's getting
Yes.
a roof over your head, but it's not being
Shelters don't feel like a safe place for everyone.
right.
Yeah, and there are not always shelters, and when I say that, I don't mean that us as provider. I'm a shelter provider. I try to make it feel like a safe place,
Right.
but people can't bring there's not always a shelter space available for a family.
Okay.
There's not always I don't know that there is. Maybe one shelter where you can go as a couple and stay together in a room, maybe 2 shelters, and so, or that you could have a beer after work. I mean, there are a lot of things that people give up to go there, or maybe they have, the only belongings they have is an RV, and the things that they store in their RV, that they've lost everything else that they had, and they worked really hard for these things, and what are they gonna do with their things when they go to a shelter? They can't park it outside. So there's a lot of reasons that that's not a viable option for some people, or there's no beds available. There's always that too.
Yeah, I think you kind of started to touch, kind of starting to understand the types of shelters. Is it a high barrier? Is it a low barrier? We have extreme weather, it's either really cold or really hot. And then, that prevents people from, we look like, well, why don't you just go to a shelter? Maybe they have a dog, maybe they have all their stuff at their camp, and they're literally choosing their stuff, because that's all they have, than saving their own life. Because if they go to that shelter, and it's a communal shelter, and there's, I think Shepherd's Lighthouse has like 100 beds.
I think during the winter time,
Yeah.
they were like 134.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely
so-
over like capacity, trying to, get folks in, but you still have, people declining those options. And I think that again goes back to choice, and fear that, if they get out of the cold weather, if they get out of the heat, their stuff is gonna be gone, and they have to start all over again, and, So I think kind of just understanding that there are different types of shelters, and it's not as easy as just pick a shelter and go to it. So, and you mentioned that, the 255, I mean, for that, I was kind of talking more like a housing wait list, but there is a shelter wait list. So we have 2 hotel shelters that are essentially managed through the coordinated entry system. And going back to what Eliza said, is that they have, folks have to be, who is the most vulnerable. And they kind of, there is an assessment done, and then someone gets a number. So if you're like you, a number, yes, they get a number. And then their number, you get to the top of the list, or you get to the bottom of the list, depending on this number that was assigned to you based on your assessment. And that list is getting longer and longer. So now we have shelters that people may feel more safe in, may be able to bring more of their belongings, be able to bring their, stay with their significant other if they're a partner, and be okay maybe leaving their stuff because there's consistent case management there, so there's going to be a continued cycle of them meeting with someone. So they might be like, I'm okay leaving that stuff because there's an opportunity here that I don't want to miss. But that list is long. It's a long list.
And you're just talking about, right now, you're talking about shelter.
To get into shelter,
which
yeah.
is time, I'm thinking maybe time limited.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's the big need for housing.
Yeah.
which is- I mean, that's the distinction you're making, isn't it?
Yes,
Shelter
housing and shelter,
Housing.
yes, so
And so what's the?
the housing
I mean, people
situation.
like to get
Yeah.
housing, and then what's the, I can't see.
Yeah.
That's actually our event.
I was just gonna say,
That's another event.
in 2 weeks, we are speaking much more directly about the spectrum of housing on the lower end. It's probably improperly titled as the gap in affordable housing. It should just be the gaps in available housing.
Yeah.
And that's in 2 weeks, and we've got some folks talking, and it reminds me that we also did not mention Central Oregon Villages.
That's what I was just gonna
They're
say.
right here.
We're growing,
And
yes.
so there are 22 beds there too. But you're right, we are only speaking of shelter. That whole continuum of housing is what we'll talk about in a couple of weeks, and it's incredibly lacking, but at least we have 500 instead of the 200 that we had.
Right, and
So-
until recently, I think Central Oregon Villages works with families, women and children, and then the shelter she was mentioning that you have to go through the list and qualify for, also works with families. But until recently, it was just Bethlehem Inn who has 10 family units, and so there was a waiting list for that as well. So yeah, sorry, I hope you guys didn't think you were coming here to be uplifted. I'm sorry, I know I see some of your faces.
Yeah, I do want to add, I'm sorry, just one thing, because I think it's important that when a lot of these shelter programs started back, or even safe parking, our vision was you would come into a program like safe parking, and you might stay a month to 6 months, stabilize, and move into housing. The challenge is housing is taking 2 to 5 years. So now do we exit people back out to houselessness once we've got them stabilized? Because we have so many people working that are in safe parking and in these other shelter programs. And I apologize because we did forget to mention Central Oregon Villages and St. Vincent de Paul.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Another
yeah.
10 beds. But I think the count is still appropriate, but.
Yeah, and the Veterans Village, and so we don't want to miss anyone.
So I have a quick question, Stacey, that I kind of want to go back to something you said about optics. I live out in Redmond, and I actually live very close to the camp that is out in Redmond. And for about 2.5 years, I've been helping with a group that goes and feeds them on Sundays, collecting supplies, etc. That has obviously changed my view on a lot of things. One of the things I'm hoping we do get from these conversations is a feeling of maybe empowerment, both to go out and volunteer, but also to combat some of the NIMBY thoughts and feelings that that we have in this area. I'm experiencing them with my own family who say, are you sure it's safe for you to go out there? I've taken my 5-year-old nephew and he loves it, but is it safe? Yes, it is, because we're feeding them food. There's no, I don't feel unsafe. But I still get the people who push back, who, especially in Redmond, but they're sweeping Hummel Road again. There's just swept through downtown here. So what are the people here, please, going to do to help with those optics though? To start, we need to start showing up at City Hall and City Council meetings and maybe feeling safer, because I know that they want to build some more villages, and I had a friend looking at a piece of property out near Tumalo, and as soon as they found out the property behind them was going to be developed into housing, they decided not to buy it.
There's two issues with optics, and there's responsibility on both sides. So I may not say something popular, but I'll start with our unhoused population has to have some responsibility about doing some cleanup when we make trash available and receptacles and working with us. I think that over this past time, we have really seen our unhoused community members really step up and do that cleaning when they have the support and the supplies. Keep in mind, when you're unhoused, and I'm speaking just from someone else because I haven't walked in these shoes, the day is extremely complex. I cannot think of a more exhausting day. You don't know where you're gonna go to the bathroom. You don't know where your food is gonna be. You don't know where you're gonna lay your head at night. So those are first and foremost. And honestly, trash, that might fall down, where us as housed driving by don't like it, but imagine being in your home and the trash service stops. What is the trash gonna look like outside of your home? It's gonna start piling up. So there are optics there. When we talk about other optics, I think it's important that everyone has a voice in the community, because the reality is we need spaces for people to live where they feel safe and they have the basic needs met. I will caution that and this is just me personally, I can't speak for anyone else, in terms of volunteering, I really encourage people to go to a nonprofit or an agency. Find something you're passionate about. Is it food? Is it wanting to be out there and serve? And try to get in with a nonprofit. The reason I say this is there are safety issues. When we are dealing with the kindest, gentlest person who might be using substances or who might be in a mental health crisis, and Colleen can speak to that, there are some risks. We also need a lot of training, because if we walk up to someone who might be in the middle of a crisis and we come, jaunting onto their property or their home trying to give them something, that would be a trigger for me. So I do caution that we want to help, we want to volunteer. It is wonderful to have the expertise of a service provider or other volunteer agencies that are on the street and have that experience. I think it's wonderful to have our kiddos out there to see. I love the idea of going into different congregate meal programs and things like that, and that's a great experience. So I think those are some of the optics, and then it's also changing the optics of sitting down and having a conversation with someone. You all of a sudden see them, you don't see the dirt, you don't see that they haven't showered for a month, you hear and see the person, and that this time in their life is not defining exactly who they are. They have a life, they were someone's child, they grew up, and so I think that changes optics, just the engagement.
Yeah, I think the community has had some opportunities to put things forward, like projects or more villages and things like that. But fear and not understanding is what stopped it. People are afraid of things that they don't understand, or they lack empathy for things they don't understand because they haven't experienced it. So I do agree, being able to have a conversation with someone in a way that feels safe for them too. Because if we're walking up to someone when they're in crisis, it may not feel safe to them if they don't know us and we're asking them questions, because they have to answer a lot of questions about their situation all the time to access services. So it can be a tough thing for them to experience. So yeah, just doing it with, Family Kitchen or other nonprofits or solid volunteer volunteer groups that are going into those situations.
So if you know someone in Redmond that wants to volunteer, let me know, because I can put you in touch with the collective action.
Other questions?
Questions over there.
Okay.
Sorry, I can stand in front of you.
Hi there, my name's Jennifer. I've been in the community for over 30 years, and I came here to get more information about the situation, because as you know, we get different information from different outlets. But my question, Colleen, is when you opened with your remarks, you said that the majority of the population were locals here, and yet the gentleman that came from Portland that did the consulting said that 80% of the population was not from here. And so those are the kind of things where I'd like to kind of get your feedback on that, because we're getting different information from different sources.
Thank you. I thank you for being here and coming and listening to the people that are here and that live and work in this community. Like, I'll get emotional about it because
Yeah, that's been tough.
it's been really hard for somebody to come in and exploit some of the people we work with. And there's a narrative there that is being spun. Homelessness right now is a political issue. It is the people that are living unhoused are being pawns in a political game, and there are people that are coming to exploit that. And it's as a service provider, I think we all were just talking about that same issue, and it's probably something we all talk about on a day-to-day basis. And so from my perspective, from the work that I do and that have been doing, that my staff are doing every day, people that we work with live and work here, and they have for 10, 15, 20 years. We have some people, yes, that they have just come here in the last couple of years. Maybe we had a global pandemic and people are trying to make ends meet, try to find work. There's a lot of energy of like, Bend has jobs, move to Bend, they've got jobs. And so people do come and try to do that, but there's no housing. So I want to thank you for coming and hearing from the people that are actually boots on the ground doing the work day in and day out. And it's hard because there is a narrative being spun in the community that's not true. And that's coming back to kind of what Stacy was just saying. For folks that are interested, I implore you to volunteer and get to know those people from your own perspective, and then you can kind of make your own judgment. So, but thanks for
And we use as service providers, not just like our day-to-day working with people, but the point in time count that we did, just in January, we do it every year. We surveyed, we have volunteers to do it, our providers do it, and it's everyone sitting here, you know, and all of us work together on this to survey the over 1,600 folks that we surveyed. Even the school district helps. We asked where people were last stably housed. We asked how long they were here, and so we have that data of the 1,600 plus people. And that data is not what that gentleman said. It is what Colleen said. And so this year we expanded the questionnaire because we hear it every year. And I'm sure I'll get in trouble for saying this, but if you look him up, you can see that he says that in every community he's ever been paid to come to. Look up his name, Google it, paid to come to. Look him up. So yeah, there are people who come here from other areas, but I don't want to name this. I think it's 65% of the people we surveyed had been here for longer than 20 years, something like that. I don't remember the exact statistics. So we have that information. It's on the Homeless Leadership Coalition's website. It's out there, like the data. We submit that information to the federal government. It's all, it's not falsified.
It's a requirement
It's a
for
requirement.
every continuum of care to
Yeah,
be
so
a
we
point in
know.
time count. It's been
Yeah.
going on forever.
Can I ask a follow-up
Yes.
question? Thank you for that information and clarifying that. Then I guess my next question would be, who paid for that consultant to come to our area and do that study?
Yeah.
I've heard different things.
Study would be.
Not us. I don't know. Somebody did. Somebody should ask if you guys get a chance to meet him.
I would recommend getting a hold, I know KTVZ has been using him as an expert. I would recommend getting a hold of them and asking some further questions, because we've asked generally as individuals that they stop using him as an expert.
And I would just like to say too, I think when people are asked questions with certain, it's confirmatory bias.
Yeah.
Right? If
Yeah.
someone is asked a question in a leading way, they're going to answer in a certain way, and that is what is actually happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Other questions? I know over here.
So I know the situation with Hummel Road, and I know that there have been a number of people in the city and county apparently that are being sued now because of the planned sweep of Hummel Road. So what can we do as citizens to provide input? Because I personally feel that this is really wrong, that people don't have a place to go, and that they're going to be quote unquote swept. And what can we do about this? And also, if the sweep continues, what is the best thing we can do for the people who are gonna be displaced? Is it gift cards? What can we do?
So, great question, Judy, thank you. I did talk to some representative from the city today. I know they were out on Hunnell to help with those that need accommodations. The question we're getting is, will this go through next week? And what I have been told by legal and everything is that Hunnell will be exited next week. The very disjointed part of this is that I feel like right now we're in this really bad game of whack-a-mole where we're kind of like moving people here, then moving there, we move them again. Really traumatizing for a population that is already traumatized. Is Hunnell Road, the ideal spot? I'd love to see a place that has more dignity and safety in terms, I've been on there and almost been hit by cars so many times. I think people deserve to have that. I think that, and maybe I'm wrong, I think there are movements towards that, but I don't see it soon. I think it's down the road. I don't know if all of you agree. I think there are some works in progress for that. Right now, our focus for Hunnell Road, just for us, and I think most people, is what are we able to do to help you get mobile, to get where you are going to go? Do you have family that you can move your trailer onto? Making sure everyone has an assessment that's interested, so we've done a lot of assessments. We're also doing things like IDs, birth certificates, and driver's license. Also helping with some car insurance so that when you are hitting the streets, that you're driving around legally. Getting a birth certificate and ID for someone, I can't tell you how many times we'll do that, and the people will look at me and say, I exist. And that's amazing, we don't think about that, right? And it's critical. So we're right now really focusing on those things because that's what we can do right now. I always think communicating with the city and the county and the commissioners and the city council is really important. And maybe the conversation or the argument is, fine, you move people from Hunnell, but the problem is we need spaces. We need to have a place. And not just one. You don't put 100 people on a little postage stamp, so.
Yeah, I think it's key, because I think they hear from us a lot. As providers, they even sometimes ask us to come and ask us our input, and we provide it. But I think that my thought is that they decide these things because they hear a lot from the parties that are like, we don't want to see people experiencing homelessness, And so I think the more that community members who live in this community can speak up and say, can you find solutions before moving people who are highly vulnerable folks, many of whom are disabled or have other things going on. So I think the more you can speak out, whether that's a letter, public comment, in meetings, just say I support what the service providers are saying, that these community members need support before they're being, removed.
Another question. Oh, sorry.
No, say go to your city council meetings and go to your county commissioner meetings. I recently started going, and I'm just blown away about how much is passed that we just don't know about. So go there, show up, just listen, start to ask questions, start to write in. But yeah.
I've got quite a lot of questions, but and this might be unanswerable, but you're talking about the optics, and I think you said in some cases there is some trash receptacles put that, but in general, I don't see us actually helping to make those optics better as a city. Because I haven't seen those big receptacles, and I haven't seen porta potties. And, you know, so to your point about like, where do they go? To go to the bathroom? You know, and so, you know, so we're not helping at all with those optics. And why can't the city put some money toward doing that? Because I guess, I don't know if you know the answer, but I think sweeps cost money. So what about some of those other things? And like, you know, put the money, instead of all these sweeps, put the money toward some of the things to make some of the situations, while we see longer term situations and that, but do you,
I think
Is
you
it
see
gonna-
all of our potential.
We say
but
a lot
the
of
numbers
yeah.
though, to actually speak to that in terms of, you know, or do they not care?
I don't think it's a matter of maybe caring. I think one of the concerns, and I'm speaking for a group I shouldn't speak for because I'm speaking microphone. Oh, I think one of the challenges is that I heard in meetings is that if we put a porta potty and a bathroom somewhere, then we have now set up what almost appears to be it's okay to be here, and then businesses and other house communities. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying I think that is one of the fears. And the other thing I'm gonna say, and again, probably not very popular, money talks. So when you have members in a community that have a lot of money, you're going to be listening to those voices when we might be here saying, wait, hold on, this, you know, it's a very complex problem, but there also are solutions at other areas. And should the money for clearing out a camp that are gonna spend $300,000 or $400,000 should be spent securing stable locations? So we're all in agreement. So I don't know if we can, we're just nodding with you because we agree. And we're trying to use our voices, and I think that it's a very clear statement that we need the voices of other people, because all of a sudden we become like Charlie Brown's mom, you know, that wah, 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 you know, and so, yeah, and so that would be my stand, or if you have more.
Well, I think one thing that's been eye-opening for me is when we've talked about identifying pieces of land that for folks to go to, right? Where they're clearing potentially Juniper Ridge, they're clearing Redmond, the RPZ zone in Redmond, all these things. And as service providers, we are left with, you can't be here and we don't know where to tell you to go. And that's really hard day in and day out. And what I'm learning is like, as we've started to move towards like coming up with solutions, it really comes down, a lot of it comes down to land use laws and how certain plots of land are zoned. And so I can speak to like the Board of County Commissioners did reach out to the governor's office to have her waive the land use laws for certain managed camps outside the UGB, because there is land out there that folks
see it.
Yeah, and so like when we talk about wanting to provide resources like porta potties and dumpsters and things like that, when entities are doing that, it can go against land use laws. And so as elected officials, what I hear is this hesitation of like, we don't want to go against the laws that are in place. And so I think that there's that piece of the advocacy that we need to be kind of advocating for waiving of those land use laws.
They'll waive it for community development.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's that money piece, right?
Right. Oh, yeah.
I had a question about when you talk about the 1,600 families, is that only in Deschutes County? And does that go outside of Deschutes at all? And in addition to that, like, are you seeing, because there aren't resources outside in our other outlying areas in Central Oregon, are you seeing people coming in from those counties because they know that those resources are here?
Yeah, so we count the region, so the Tri-County region, and then also the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs, because they're all part of our continuum of care region that the federal government, calls our area.
Yeah.
And so, that over 1,600 is the people experiencing homelessness in that region that we were able to talk to.
Yeah, it seems like such an
It's
inaccurate
like
number.
it's like 15,000 square miles. Like, it's like a crazy big, it's a lot of space to try to cover. And I can tell you, like, we know there's homelessness in Prineville.
Yeah.
We don't have many we have Redemption House in Prineville. We don't have very many, I don't know very many, outreach providers. Most of our count of people living unsheltered is done by people who do outreach. We don't, for the amount of area that we serve and the amount of people living unsheltered, we don't have the adequate people. So I know that we know it's many, many more. And you can look at the data and sometimes see more people in Prineville that are experiencing homelessness than what we counted, because we just didn't have the services to do it there. So that's a tough thing. And then you do sometimes see, like if there's nothing for a family or certain individual in a community, like there's not shelter in one community, that they may, we've had calls. We had a family during the winter time who was coming who needed shelter, and they were from Warm Springs, and they contacted the only youth we don't typically house families of parents of that age, but we did in this case because lots of little kids, and frankly it was too big of a family to be in a shelter.
Right, what about the definitions too, Eliza, so the count's 1,600 or whatever, but there's a definition.
Yeah.
Unsheltered, and we can't count this and we can't count that. You wanna touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so if we get into that, so for example, youth. So the school districts around the country do keep track of the students that are experiencing homelessness, and their definition of what homelessness is different than what the other, like the homelessness definition for the federal government is. So federal school district definition is different than like the homelessness district, so we didn't count the number of students that were doubled up. So families who were homeless, but somebody took them in, so they could be kicked out any day. So we also know that, oh man, so many more. I should have the stats with me. But that is like also public knowledge too. Like you can look up to see like in the Central Oregon school districts how many youth and families are experiencing homelessness. And so just the numbers that we did count, we are mentioned in the report to Congress as like the top 4 areas in the country for unsheltered youth homelessness and unsheltered family homelessness.
In the country?
Because per capita, like the issue of housing here, the number of youth that are living unsheltered and families is just, so that's just this last December, the 2022 report to Congress.
And I think one thing that's important when we talk about point in time count too is we go off of the HUD definition, and that is what was reported. The HUD definition of homelessness does not include folks that are precariously housed, like doubled up. It does not include individuals that are living in a hotel or motel if they're paying for it by themselves. And
so even if, like, let's say an agency paid for it yesterday, we're just asking about that one day. So if they experienced homelessness the entire month, but that one night they had money to stay in a hotel room, they don't count.
or
So-
they slept on their friend's couch because it was
One night,
0 degrees out and they just wanted to be out of the cold. And if it was on that night, then they're not counted. Even though the day that you're actually surveying them, they're gonna be outside.
So there's a lot of weird nuances with the point in time count in that there's a lot of people we talk to and survey, because at the time because we can do it for a week and we'll ask them about that one night. So on the night of the 24th, where did you sleep? And there are people who we know because we've worked with them for years, but that night they don't qualify as like that, we can't count them.
Microphone's here, we're gonna do this.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the newly unhoused population and possibly share a story, if you're familiar, of like some circumstances, and what are the biggest factors leading to newly unhoused right now that you're seeing?
I think
think there's so many scenarios. One of them is maybe someone that was precariously housed, lost their job during COVID, received some COVID money to be able to retain housing, and now that that funding has stopped, they are now being exited or evicted from their housing. And there are funds out there to help, but not enough funding. And there are other funds that will only help if you're currently experiencing houselessness. So that's one thing we see a lot. We also see a lot of medical issues. I see a lot in our older adults. One of the partners in the relationship may have experienced just a crisis medically, and prescription assistance, housing, it's just not enough to cover it. So divorce also, we see domestic violence. I think as things become a lot more the turmoil in our world, we're seeing domestic violence increase in some situations as well. And so many others, people that had businesses that collapsed during COVID, or people that never recovered from 2008 or whenever the other housing, so there are a lot of challenges. And the reality is, as we get more people, it's wonderful to have more money into our area, but it also brings up that housing, which makes it, they say it's affordable, but affordable for who? And that's the other huge discrepancy.
I can speak to one story. Just this week, I was contacted by a colleague who's working with a family, single mother with 2 adult children in the home, both developmentally disabled, renting a home in town where the owner decided to come in and sell the house, and they cannot find anything that they can afford. Mom's working full-time, one of the adult children is working full-time, but they have medical, expenses that they can't cover, and because of that income, they almost are overqualified for some of the affordable housing that might be available. So they're in this in-between where they make a little bit too much, but not enough for what is available. And so this is, a single mom with 2 adult children, 2 full-time incomes in the household, and they will be on the streets.
I know that next week or in a couple weeks is the housing thing, but I think that you bring up a really great point. Is a lot of times you have to qualify for certain services, and that's income based. And so if you make too much for affordable but not enough for market rate rental, there's this really big gap right there. So I think we started to see a lot of people start to fall within that, because even affordable, we have an affordable housing complex, and a 1-bedroom's almost $1,000. That's affordable property, and someone who is just on SSI and makes $841 a month, they can't afford that. And then you start talking about subsidized housing, and you want to talk about subsidized housing wait list, that's 5 years out. So I think there's a really, we hear, all this affordable housing that's coming up, and yes, it is coming. And I think, again, sorry, I know you're talking about this later down in a couple of weeks, but those units are already full by the time that they're ready and built. Because the waiting list for these new affordable housing complexes open 2 to 3 years. And then you have service providers who are filling those spots and putting people on wait lists. So now it's up and those 200 units are full. And so now you're adding more people to that wait list. So I think a lot of the stories that we're, people entering into homelessness is housing related, because their house was sold. There was a crisis and they just couldn't get $500 extra. We have the moratorium that ended, and so property managers were just ready to get people out, and and that was hard. And I worked with I was working in Prineville, and a woman came in and she was experiencing homelessness, and she was a property manager, and she was affected by people not paying rent. And for me, that was a totally different switch for me to be oh my gosh, you you're living on someone's couch and living in your car and you have a home and you're renting it out, but for the last 2 years, you haven't received any rent. And for me, that was like, what? And so that was humbling, and you know, there is two sides, you know, all of our communities affected. But I think, you know, this housing is so nuanced and detailed, and I can nerd out on it all day, but it's a lot more complicated than just, you know, getting some affordable housing units.
Okay, I have two questions. One, why do you think we have such a high amount of youth that are homeless here in our area? And then my second kind of broader question is, what do you think the solution is? Working or a step in the right direction that feels feasible if you have community support?
Yeah, I think we have a high number of youth experiencing homelessness across the country. As far as like us with unsheltered homelessness, I believe that's because we only have 18 beds, and the number of youth experiencing homelessness is, I mean, in the point in time count, I really should have written this down. I think it was like 1-6 or 2 something that we counted. And so just in that age group. And so that's an issue. Why youth enter into homelessness in Central Oregon, there's a lot of reasons. I would say upwards of like 45 to 60% of our youth experiencing homelessness in Central Oregon are LGBTQIA, and it is not safe to be at home, or they're not allowed to be at home if they're gonna live who they are. I would also say that there's a lot of families experiencing homelessness and young people having experienced homelessness a long time with their families, and for whatever reason, like whether it's adolescence or, you know, abuse or neglect or different things go on that lead to that. Another reason is that the high number of our youth who are experiencing homelessness, especially that transition age youth group, which is like 18 to 24, many of them are exiting systems like foster care, the juvenile justice system, that they were awarded the state, but were not provided any, you know, independent living skills, any support, any like protective factors that when they go into an adulthood, they have, you know, nothing. They don't have anyone to call if they want to lease an apartment and they've never had a rental before. You can't. It's really tough, you know. There's a lot of things that prevent young people from going into housing if they don't have the support that they need. I don't remember your second part of your question.
Solutions.
I think just like with adult or family homelessness, I think we have to have like the wide range of the continuum of services, because every youth is different. We have a high number of youth experiencing homelessness in our region that are chronically homeless. That's a definition from HUD. It means that they are disabled and have experienced homelessness for a longer period of time. We do have a lot of youth who are disabled, who are experiencing homelessness, whether that's like physical, mental disabilities, and can't work. So there's a lot of different services that we need. I think we need to invest in prevention services and really strong wraparound services in the school district to prevent, like, to have like care to wrap around these young people when it first starts happening, whether that's in the families. Like, if we can keep families together, people need that. They need support, they need community. And when a child is alone or youth is alone experiencing homelessness, there's a lot of other risk factors that go into that. Trafficking, I could talk about it all day. But I think just like investing in prevention first, you know, really addressing youth homelessness is preventing adult homelessness. So it's prevention all the way through, but I think we have to start with very young children.
And I would like to point out too that they do keep aging. So the 45-year-old guy that I see every day at Family Kitchen for lunch or dinner or whatever was that kid. And I hope that we can all hold that as well in our hearts, because we kind of forget that too. So, yes.
I wanted to add one thing. As you're hearing all this, it's, you can hear how heavy of a topic and how much it weighs on all of us. I think to be able to do this work for a short period of time or a long period of time, there are certain things that are critical. And for me personally, it is holding on to the successes. It is to make sure that I'm looking at the small successes. And they can be someone who comes up to me one day and says, I usually drink 18 beers, I drink 14 today. And believe it or not, we need to celebrate that. But it's celebrating those people that are not only working to move forward in their life or to move in their life by ideas and documentation, but to celebrate the little things. Today I was on the street with a group, and this one guy tripped over a backpack. And it was a split second when two of the other men standing there bent down to pick him up. And it's really, and I don't know why that stuck with me all day. You know, these are gentlemen that are really having some complex crisis in their life. I have seen people give their last dime to someone. The care and concern that I see, it's not everyone, it's not everywhere, but I think I personally have to hold on each day to what that one success is, and it might be different for each person. And it can't be the success I define. And so that's really critical to remember. So, and I want you to walk away that there are successes and that we are connecting with people and we are having conversation. People are entrusting us at a time of their life where they might feel a lot of shame or guilt or trauma, and they're opening their hearts to us. And the greatest gift we can give them, besides kindness and empathy and compassion, is the gift of listening. You know, and I learned that over the years. I used to try to talk so much to someone to fill a space, and now, as I've gotten older, just learning to give them that space to talk where I can listen. So.
And with that, I say thank you all for listening. I do encourage you, if you'd like to continue conversations, go ahead and connect with these folks or any of the folks we talked about in the audience too that are service providers. I just want to say thank you, Cassie and the crew, for making this space available. We do have another conversation coming in 2 weeks, and then another one in August that's more about what we can all do together to help. So thank you for being here. Thank you very much to our panelists.